The aroma of fresh bread filled the air of the small bakery in the heart of the Parkside neighborhood in Philadelphia. Anna Lee watched the morning bustle with satisfaction as she organized the previous day's paperwork. Routine was her comfort zone. Numbers, spreadsheets, schedules, everything had its own logic, its own order. "Ms. Lee, I need the system password to close yesterday's register." Janet, her longest-serving employee, called from the counter. "Coming, Jan," she responded automatically, finishing typing the last numbers into her calculator. It was just another ordinary Monday morning. The doorbell rang constantly, announcing the arrival of regular customers. Hurried executives looking for breakfast. Ladies choosing bread for lunch. Students buying snacks for college. Hannah Lee knew each one by name, knew their preferences, their stories. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. The cheese bread is still warm." She smiled at the gray-haired gentleman who came every day at the same time. "Ms. Lee, you're an angel. My wife was so happy with the cake you made for her birthday." Anna Lee smiled politely, but inwardly rolled her eyes at the word angel. Not that she didn't appreciate the compliment, but all that talk about celestial beings deeply bothered her. To her, life was much simpler: hard work, dedication, and numbers that add up at the end of the day. As she walked to the register to help Janet, a sharp pain shot through her chest. She ignored it, as she always did with any sign of fatigue or discomfort. There was no time to be sick. The bakery needed her. Her bills needed to be paid, and her routine couldn't be interrupted. The pain, however, had other plans. In a matter of seconds, what was a twinge transformed into a crushing pressure. Anna Lee tried to lean on the counter, but her legs gave way. The sounds around her began to fade, as if someone was gradually turning down the volume of the world. "Ms. Lee!" Janet's voice seemed to come from far away. "Ms. Lee, are you okay?" The world began to spin. The voices of customers merged into an incomprehensible murmur. The last thing Anna Lee saw was her employee's worried face approaching before everything plunged into darkness. And then, silence. A silence different from anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a profound peace, a void that, paradoxically, seemed to be full of something indescribable. When she opened her eyes again, Anna Lee realized something was deeply wrong, or perhaps, for the first time in her life, deeply right. She could see her own body lying on the bakery floor. Janet kneeled beside her, desperately trying to perform CPR. Panicked customers, some on the phone calling an ambulance, others praying. "I'm here," she tried to shout, but her voice produced no sound. It was as if she existed in a parallel dimension, invisible to the eyes of the living. Fear should have taken over her at that moment. After all, she was witnessing her own death. But instead of the terror that would be natural, a different sensation began to envelop her. It was as if every cell of her being began to vibrate at a different frequency. That's when the light appeared. It wasn't an ordinary light like the one that came through the bakery windows every morning. It was a living, pulsating light that seemed to carry within it all the wisdom of the universe. And within this light, a presence manifested. A presence that, even before fully revealing itself, Anna Lee recognized in every fiber of her being. It was him. And at that moment, all her certainties, all her skepticism, all her supposed rationality crumbled like a house of cards. The presence of Jesus was something that transcended any human description. It wasn't just visual, it was an experience that involved every aspect of being. Anna Lee felt enveloped in a love so deep and unconditional that all her defenses, built over years of skepticism, instantly melted away. He didn't need to introduce himself. There was no need for words for her to know with absolute certainty that she was in the presence of the Son of God himself. The same God she had neglected throughout her life. The same God she had ridiculed so many times in conversations with friends. "My child." His voice resonated, not through her ears, but directly in her soul. It was as if each word was woven with pure love. The tears began to flow freely. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of recognition. Janet, her faithful employee, came to visit her every day after her shift at the bakery. "Ms. Lee, you won't believe what's happening," she told her one afternoon. "People keep asking about you. Some are leaving notes, flowers, even written prayers." Anna Lee smiled. "Jan, I need to tell you something." And for the first time she shared her experience. She talked about the light, about the encounter with Jesus, about her mother's embrace. The more she spoke, the more tears ran down Janet's face. "I always knew you were special, Ms. Lee, but this is a miracle." "It's a responsibility," Anna Lee responded thoughtfully. "He sent me back for a reason." It was that night that the first trial came. Ryan Davis, a young journalist from the Philadelphia Inquirer, managed to bypass visiting hours and enter her room. "Ms. Lee?" His voice was polite, but his eyes had an investigative gleam that she immediately recognized. "I'm a reporter, and I'd like to hear your story. This near-death experience story is causing quite a stir in the city." Before she could respond, a wave of knowledge hit her. She could see the pain hidden behind the young reporter's professionalism, the recent loss of his father, his struggle against depression, his desperate search for answers. "Ryan," she said softly, "your father is at peace." The young man paled, dropping his notebook. How did you—" "He wants you to know that he forgives you, and that you should forgive yourself too." The journalist's defenses crumbled. There in the hospital room, his tears began to flow freely. Anna Lee extended her hand, offering silent comfort. That night, after Ryan left, she clearly heard the voice in her heart. "This is how you will touch people, one at a time." The return home was more difficult than Anna Lee had imagined. Her apartment, once a refuge of practicality and order, now seemed strangely empty. The financial spreadsheets piled on the office desk, which were once her main concern, seemed insignificant in the face of the magnitude of what she had experienced. Sitting in her favorite armchair, she observed the city through the window. Philadelphia stretched out before her, its lights beginning to flicker in the twilight. How could she return to her old routine after having experienced eternity? The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, family, even people she barely knew wanted to know how she was doing. But how to explain the inexplicable? How to put into words an experience that transcended language itself? "Anna, you need to rest," her cousin Teresa insisted, arranging the sofa cushions for the third time. "The doctor said you need absolute rest." "I'm fine, Teresa," she responded patiently. "Actually, I've never felt so good in my entire life." It was true. Despite the physical fatigue, something inside her radiated a new energy, a vitality that couldn't be explained by medical parameters. Night came, and with it, silence. Teresa had finally gone home, leaving Anna Lee alone with her thoughts. That's when the familiar voice echoed in her heart. Tomorrow is the day. She knew exactly what that meant. It was time to return to the bakery. The next morning, when she opened the doors of Star Bakery, a small crowd was already waiting for her. News about her experience had spread quickly through the city. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine concern, and some, she could feel, came in search of answers to their own pains. Janet ran to hug her as soon as she saw her. "Ms. Lee, shouldn't you be resting?" "No, Jan. My place is here." And then, looking at the anxious faces that filled her bakery, she added softly, "He sent me back for this." The day unfolded in a surreal way. As she attended to customers and organized orders, Anna Lee began to realize that each person who entered her bakery carried a story, a pain, a specific need. And somehow, inexplicably, she knew exactly what each one needed to hear. For Mrs. Marlene, who had recently lost her husband, words of comfort about life after death brought peace. For young Charlie, desperate with financial problems, precise advice about a job opportunity changed his perspective. For little Maria, who suffered from bullying at school, a hug and words of wisdom transformed her day. Late in the afternoon, when the movement began to decrease, Ryan Davis reappeared. This time not as the skeptical journalist, but as someone in search of answers. As if her soul had finally found something it had been searching for without knowing. "Forgive me," she tried to say, but realized she didn't need to form words. Her thoughts, feelings, and repentance were perfectly understood. It was then that another presence materialized beside her. Anna-Lee's heart, or whatever essence still maintained her consciousness, almost stopped again. It was her mother, exactly as she remembered her in the good days before the illness that took her away. "Mom?" The thought escaped before she could contain it. Her mother smiled that smile she missed so much. "My little one," she said, and her voice carried the same melody that Anna-Lee kept in her memory. "It's not your time yet." But Anna-Lee wanted to protest. There, wrapped in that infinite peace, for the first time in her life she felt truly at home. How could she go back? Jesus came even closer, and his presence intensified. It was as if every moment of her life was being illuminated by a new understanding. Every choice, every harsh word, every moment she rejected faith. It was all part of a greater journey. "You have a mission," the divine voice echoed again in her being. "Many need to hear your testimony, but who will believe me?" The fear of others' incredulity was already manifesting. "Do not fear," he replied, and with those words, an indescribable peace filled every part of her being. "I will be with you." Her mother approached, embracing her in a hug that transcended the physical. "One day we'll be together again, my daughter, but now you need to go back and share what you've experienced." "How will I manage to explain something so indescribable?" "The Holy Spirit will guide you," Jesus' voice resonated with unshakable certainty. "You will be my witness." Before she could ask more questions, the light began to intensify. It was as if all the love in the universe was concentrating on a single point, completely enveloping her. The last thing she heard was her mother's voice. "Until we meet again, my little one." And then, like a plunge into icy waters, Anna-Lee felt herself being pulled back. The return was brutal. The chest pain, the weight of the physical body, the agitated voices around her. Everything came back at once. Her eyes opened to find the concerned face of the paramedic performing resuscitation procedures. "She's back," someone shouted. 13 minutes, another paramedic announced, checking the clock. 13 minutes without vital signs. But Anna-Lee barely heard the voices around her. Her mind was still full of the light, love, and presence she had experienced. How could she return to her normal life after that? How could she pretend nothing had happened? The answer came clear in her heart. She couldn't, and she shouldn't. St. Luke's Hospital was in an uproar. In his 30 years of career, Dr. Richard Mendez had never seen anything like it. A patient who had been without vital signs for 13 minutes returning to life without any neurological sequelae. It was scientifically impossible. "The exams show absolutely nothing abnormal," he explained to the gathered medical team. "It's as if she had never had a cardiac arrest." Anna-Lee heard the discussions from her bed, but her mind was elsewhere. Since she had returned, something had fundamentally changed in her perception of the world. It was as if she could see through people, feel their pains, their anguishes, their deepest needs. Nurse Mary, who cared for her on the night shift, entered the room to check her vital signs. "How are you feeling?" she asked, adjusting the heart monitor. Anna-Lee looked into the nurse's eyes, and without knowing how, she knew. "Your son will be fine," she said softly. Mary froze, the blood pressure device still in her hands. How do you know about my son?" "I can feel your worry. He's sick, isn't he? But he will recover. Have faith." Tears began to stream down the nurse's face. Her 5-year-old son had been hospitalized for weeks with an illness that doctors had still not been able to diagnose. It was a burden she carried in silence, never sharing with patients. "Thank you," whispered Mary, squeezing Anna-Lee's hand. In the days that followed, similar events began to repeat. It was as if Anna-Lee had developed a special sensitivity to others' suffering. Every person who entered her room, doctors, nurses, cleaning staff, carried their own stories of pain and hope, and she could see them all. "I spent the whole night thinking about what happened yesterday," he began, sitting at one of the tables. "How did you know about my father?" Anna-Lee smiled gently. "Ryan, some things can't be explained by the logic we know. We need to be open, to see beyond. But as a journalist, my job is to question, investigate." "And as a human being?" she asked softly. What's your job as a human being? The question caught him by surprise. For a moment he was silent, absorbing the weight of those words. You know, she continued, I used to be like you. I needed proof for everything, logical explanations, concrete evidence, but I learned that some truths can only be felt with the heart. The days that followed brought a profound change, not only in Anna Lee's life, but in the very atmosphere. Five Star Bakery, what was once just a commercial establishment, began to transform into something much bigger, a place of encounter, of healing, of spiritual renewal. People no longer came just to buy bread. They came in search of advice, comfort, a word of hope. Anna Lee received everyone with the same unconditional love she had experienced during her experience in the beyond. Ms. Lee, Janet commented one morning, observing the line that formed even before the bakery opened. You're different, your eyes, there's something in them that wasn't there before. Anna Lee smiled, helping the employee organize the shelves. It's because now I see with different eyes, Jan. I see people as he sees them. But not everything was rosy. With the growing popularity of the bakery and the stories that began to circulate about the miracles that happened there, came also criticism and skepticism. A group of doctors from the hospital where she had been admitted began to publicly question her experience, suggesting that it was all just hallucinations caused by lack of oxygen to the brain. Some members of her family, especially her older brother Richard, showed concern about her new behavior. Anna, you need to stop this, Richard insisted during a visit. You're exposing yourself too much. People will start calling you crazy. You don't understand, Richard, she responded serenely. I'm not doing this for myself, I'm just following what I was asked to do. It was during this time that the most inexplicable events began to happen. People reported feelings of profound peace upon entering the bakery. Some swore they saw a golden light enveloping Anna Lee as she talked to customers. Others described inexplicable healings after receiving her words of comfort. Ryan Davis, who now frequented the bakery regularly, began to document these occurrences, no longer with the skepticism of before, but with a deeper and more understanding look. Something is happening here, he commented one day, observing the transformation of a lady who had entered in tears and left with a serene smile. Something that can't be explained by conventional logic. Anna Lee knew it was just the beginning. Each day her sensitivity increased. She could feel people's emotions before they even spoke, saw beyond the masks they used to hide their pain. One particularly busy morning, she felt a sharp tightness in her chest, different from anything she had experienced since her return. It wasn't physical pain, but a spiritual urgency. In the middle of the crowded bakery, she clearly heard the voice she now knew so well. She's coming. Minutes later, a young woman entered the bakery. Her eyes were empty, her expression desolate. Anna Lee knew immediately. It was a suicide attempt about to happen. Marina, she called, pronouncing the name that somehow she knew, even though she had never seen the girl before. You are not alone. The young woman stopped, shocked to hear her name. Tears began to run down her face when Anna Lee approached and hugged her. How do you know my name? He told me, Anna Lee responded softly, and he showed me your broken heart. But know that this pain you feel is not the end. It's just a part of your story. Marina's story spread quickly through the city. The young woman who had planned to take her own life that morning found a new purpose after the encounter with Anna Lee. Her transformation was so profound that she herself began to help other people going through difficult times. The Star Bakery was no longer just a bakery, it had become a true center of light. People started organizing prayer groups, sharing experiences, and supporting one another. Anna Lee observed everything with a mixture of gratitude and awe. It's amazing how everything has changed, commented Jane, who was no longer just an employee, but a full partner in the mission unfolding there. People have always had this light within them, Jane, Anna Lee replied. They just needed someone to help them see it. But with the bakery's growing influence came new challenges. A group of local merchants began complaining about the intense foot traffic the bakery was attracting. Some even suggested that Anna Lee was manipulating people for financial gain. That's when she made a decision that surprised everyone. She began distributing part of the bakery's production for free to people in need. "Ma'am, you'll go bankrupt this way," Jane protested, concerned. "Trust Jane," Anna-Lee smiled. "He provides." And indeed, the more she gave away, the more the bakery prospered. Customers insisted on paying more for products, knowing that part of the money would help others. Suppliers began offering special discounts. A network of solidarity naturally formed around Star Bakery. On an autumn morning, as the city awoke, under a light drizzle, Anna-Lee felt something different in the air. It was as if a shadow hung over the bakery, a restlessness she couldn't explain. "Something is about to happen," she murmured to herself, watching the first people arrive for breakfast. It didn't take long to discover what it was. Ryan Davis entered the bakery with a grave expression, holding the day's edition of the Daily Tribune. "Anna, you need to see this," he said, extending the newspaper. On the front page, an eye-catching headline, "The Mystery of the Miracle Bakery, Science Questions Supernatural Phenomena." The article, signed by a renowned neurologist, suggested that Anna-Lee might be suffering from a rare psychological disorder caused by her near-death experience. "There's more," Ryan continued hesitantly. "The health department received an anonymous complaint. They'll be conducting a surprise inspection today." Anna-Lee closed her eyes for a moment, seeking the inner peace she now knew so well. "It's all right, Ryan. Nothing happens by chance." Throughout the day, a series of trials unfolded. The health department inspection was thorough and tense. Although the bakery had always maintained high hygiene standards, the inspectors seemed determined to find something wrong. Meanwhile, a group of people gathered outside, some defending Anna-Lee, others questioning her integrity. Local media began to arrive, turning the situation into a real spectacle. "Ms. Anna," Jane approached, worried, "there are reporters wanting to come in, and some people are saying they were deceived by you." Anna-Lee felt the weight of that moment. It was the trial that somehow she knew would come. In the midst of the chaos forming, she retreated to the back of the bakery, and for the first time since her experience, felt truly alone. "Why now?" she whispered, tears silently flowing. "Why are you allowing this to happen?" It was then that she felt that familiar presence, that unconditional love she had experienced during her death. The gentle voice echoed in her heart, "So that they may see my glory through your faith." At that moment, something extraordinary began to happen. One by one, people who had been touched by her mission began arriving at the bakery. Marina, the young woman who had been saved from suicide. Nurse Mary's son, now completely healed. Families who had found hope through her words. They began to tell their stories to the press, to the inspectors, to anyone who would listen. These weren't just accounts of miracles. They were testimonies of transformation, of love, of renewed faith. Ryan Davis, observing everything, began filming the testimonies. "This is no coincidence," he murmured, amazed. "It's something much bigger." As the weeks passed, the external storm began to calm, but a new restlessness grew in Anna-Lee's heart. The visions and spiritual perceptions were intensifying, and she began receiving increasingly clear messages about her true mission. During the nights, vivid dreams transported her to different places, where she could see people she had never met, but who needed help. Upon waking, she discovered that these people really existed and somehow found their way to the bakery. "It's as if God is preparing something bigger," she confided to Ryan, who had now become a close friend and confidant. One afternoon, while organizing the bread for donation, Anna-Lee had the most intense vision of all. She saw herself in a large space, surrounded by hundreds of people, sharing her experience. The message was clear. Her mission needed to expand, beyond the walls of the bakery. But how? She wondered, feeling the weight of the responsibility. The answer came through Ryan. "Anna, I need to show you something," he said, arriving at the bakery with his laptop. "I made a documentary with all the stories I've recorded here. People need to know this story." The documentary, titled 13 Minutes in Heaven, captured not only her near-death experience, but also the countless lives that had been transformed through her testimony. It was a touching work that showed the true essence of her mission. The premiere of Ryan's documentary coincided with one of the most extraordinary moments in Anna Lee's life. The night before the screening, she had a dream different from all the others. Her mother appeared again, but this time with a specific message. "My daughter," she said, "tomorrow you will understand why you were chosen to return." When she woke up, Anna Lee felt an inexplicable peace. She knew something important was about to happen, but she couldn't imagine the magnitude of what was to come. The documentary was to be screened at the largest theater in Springfield. As she prepared to leave home, Anna Lee received an unexpected visit. It was an elderly lady she had never seen before. "My name is Helen," said the lady, with tears in her eyes. I knew your mother." Anna Lee felt her heart race. Helen continued, "Your mother and I were nurses together many years ago. On the night she passed away, I was on duty. She told me something that I've kept all these years, waiting for the right moment to tell." The revelation that followed changed everything. Helen explained that moments before passing away, Anna Lee's mother had a vision. She saw her daughter in the future, being an instrument of God to touch lives. More than that, she saw that her own death would be the catalyst for her daughter's spiritual transformation. "Your mother departed in peace," said Helen, "because she knew that one day you would understand. She made me promise to only tell when the time was right. Today, when I saw the documentary posters around town, I knew it was time." Anna Lee wept silently. All the pieces were starting to fit together. Her resistance to faith, her near-death experience, her current mission. It was all part of a greater plan that had begun even in her mother's lifetime. The theater was packed. People from all parts of the city, and even from other states, came to watch the documentary. Anna Lee observed the crowd from the wings, feeling the weight and beauty of that moment. Ryan approached, visibly moved. "Are you ready?" She nodded, knowing she was more ready than ever. Before going on stage, she closed her eyes for a moment and felt that familiar presence, the unconditional love that had changed her life forever. The documentary began, and with it, a wave of emotion swept through the theater. People cried, laughed, and were moved by each story told. But the most impactful moment was yet to come. When the lights came on, and Anna Lee took the stage to speak, something extraordinary happened. A soft light, not coming from the spotlights, began to fill the environment. Several people in the audience later reported seeing the same thing. A golden glow emanating from her, exactly as Jesus had appeared in her experience. "I'm not here to convince anyone," she began, her voice laden with emotion. "I'm here to share a truth that changed my life. God's love is real, and it manifests in the most unexpected ways." It was then that she shared, for the first time publicly, the revelation about her mother. She told how each moment of her life, even those of greatest disbelief, had been part of a greater journey. How her near-death experience had not been just about her, but about all the lives that would be touched through her testimony. "My mother knew," she said, tears freely flowing down her face. "She knew that my disbelief would one day transform into the greatest proof of God's love, because sometimes we need to completely lose ourselves to be truly found." In the middle of the audience, Helen smiled through tears. Jane, seated beside her, held her hand. Ryan, filming everything, captured what would be just the beginning of something much bigger. Star Bakery would continue to be a special place, a point of light in the city. But now, Anna Lee's mission had expanded. Her story was no longer just hers. It was a living testimony that divine love can transform even the most disbelieving heart. And every morning, when the sun rose over Springfield, Anna Lee thanked for her 13 minutes in heaven, which had transformed into an eternity of love and service to others.